I'm Julia Chin, 30, a senior architect. This Christmas, Dad, Michael, didn't give a toast. He just looked at me across the fancy roast, his voice loud and clear for everyone. You're just a burden. Always have been. My mother, Helen, was silent. My sister, Hannah, the perfect marketing specialist, simply laughed, leaning back to savor the insult. That was the moment I realized my value to them was zero. Did I scream back? Did I cry? No. I did something far more devastating, and the answer started with the quiet clink of my fork hitting the china plate. To my parents, I was the sequel nobody asked for. Hannah, the golden child, dominated every conversation, every photo album. Her marketing career was lauded. My quiet dedication to architecture was merely a hobby. I was conditioned to seek validation, but never received it. Yet, here I am, a senior architect at a top firm. My success was built in silence, brick by silent brick. But at the Christmas table, none of those bricks mattered. Why did I keep coming back to a table where I was never truly welcome, and how did that one word, burden, finally give me the permission to leave forever? My position was fixed, the shadow. Every achievement I made was immediately weighed against Hannah's. If she got a promotion, I was asked why my job wasn't client-facing. If I got an award, they wondered if it paid as well as hers. The constant dismissal fueled a quiet, powerful ambition. I didn't work for their praise, I worked to prove their low expectations wrong. I built a career others envied, yet I still showed up to Christmas dinners, hoping for validation. What does it take for a high achiever to finally realize that the applause she seeks will never come from the people she needs it from the most? That single word, burden, wasn't new. It was the culmination of 30 years of emotional neglect. Every time I failed, every time Hannah succeeded, the message was the same: I was an inconvenience, a financial and emotional drain they regretted. This time, though, it was public. Hannah even chimed in, at least I make the family look proud with my marketing job. Their combined cruelty hit a peak, a raw, undeniable confirmation of my worthlessness. What happens when the pain finally overflows, and the victim stops arguing and starts plotting the silent exit? The room spun. I focused on the intricate pattern of the china plate, trying to control my breathing. They didn't even pause. Dad was already asking Hannah about her bonus. The shock wasn't the insult itself, but how utterly disposable I was. Is this all I am? Did the sleepless nights drafting blueprints mean nothing? My mind screamed against the injustice. I was a senior architect, but at this table, I was a defeated child, desperate for love that was never coming. The pain cleared my vision. I stopped fighting the desire to cry and started seeing the truth. My family wasn't capable of change. Their narrative was fixed. And my continued presence was just enabling their cruelty. The fight was over, but the war for my self-worth had just begun. What was the one, simple act I took next that changed the entire power dynamic forever? How many holidays did I cancel to work on their house plans for free? How many times did I drive across the city just to sit here and be ignored? They confuse sacrifice with obligation, and obligation with love. I paid the price for their comfort, not my own. I looked at my father, Michael, the source of the poison. He wasn't malicious, he was simply weak, allowing Hannah and Mom to reinforce the lie that I was the problem. I realized arguing was pointless. You can't debate with people who value their fiction over your truth. My only path to justice wasn't an outburst, it was withdrawal. My silence wasn't surrender, it was a strategy. I was done giving them the emotional energy they craved. The choice was clear: stay and fight a battle I couldn't win, or stand up, walk away, and win the entire war. I clenched my jaw so hard I could feel the muscle strain. My only mission was not to cry. Not here. Not in front of the people who saw my tears as proof of their righteousness. I picked up my water glass, forcing my hand to be steady. To react was to give them power. To shout was to lower myself to their level. I chose dignity. I chose silence. But beneath the surface, that silence was forging a vow, a promise that they would never again have the chance. I looked at Hannah, glowing under Dad's praise for her visionary marketing. She didn't have to try, her success was automatic validation. Suddenly, my title, Senior Architect, felt hollow. Was I truly the failure they needed me to be? Her smirk was the final weight tipping the scales. I realized it wasn't a competition I could win. It was a fixed system designed for my defeat. I decided right then, I was done playing. What happens when the burden stands up from the table, and the family realizes too late that they just dismissed the only person who was ever truly independent? The sadness wasn't for the insults, it was for the loss of a beautiful illusion. I realized I was not unloved, I was simply unseen. My architecture, my career, my success, none of it fit their pre-written script for the burden. This acceptance brought a strange, cold tranquility. When you know you are unvalued, you are finally free from the need to prove your value. The only person I needed to impress was myself. What does it look like when a person, finally free from decades of obligation, takes the single, powerful step toward total self-ownership? I looked at the roast, then at my fork. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I didn't even sigh. I simply set the fork down, the quiet clink against the china plate echoing louder than any shouting match we'd ever had. It was a full stop. I stood up. Slowly. Every muscle screamed to look back, to see if Mother was crying or if Dad would finally apologize. But I knew the answer. I turned, and without a single word, I walked out of the opulent dining room, out of the life they had prescribed for me. My anger wasn't a fire, it was a vacuum. A void where my love and effort used to be. The ultimate power move is not confrontation, it is becoming utterly absent from their emotional landscape. They couldn't control what wasn't there. The cold air hit my face as I slammed the front door, not in rage, but with finality. It was Christmas. I was alone. But for the first time in 30 years, I felt wholly and unapologetically my own. Did they panic? Did they call? No. And that complete, chilling silence was the final confirmation I needed to build a life so successful, they would one day beg to be a part of it. But how did I turn silence into millions? I drove for miles, waiting for the phone to buzz. A text from Mom saying come back. A furious call from Dad. A snarky text from Hannah. Nothing. The silence in the car was heavy, but the silence from their house was deafening. Not a single family member called me back. Not one. I was inconsequential. My disappearance didn't interrupt their expensive roast, their conversation, or their engineered happiness. The dinner continued. This confirmed my insignificance in their eyes better than any insult. The loneliness was brutal, a sharp physical pain. But then, a realization, I was free. I was truly alone, which meant I was truly autonomous. Their indifference was the final gift, the permission slip I never thought I'd get. What did I do with that freedom? I took the energy I used trying to please them and poured it into my career. But how do you monetize decades of trauma and turn it into the ultimate architectural masterpiece? I woke up alone on Christmas morning, not to carols, but to silence. Instead of dwelling, I channeled the humiliation. I realized that my self-worth was the only currency I had left, and I was going to invest it. The first step of my revenge was simple, absolute commitment to my career. If they called me a burden, I would become indispensable to everyone else. I opened my laptop and started drafting the proposal for the City Tower project, the one I had been hesitant about. Every line of code, every structural analysis, was fueled by the memory of Hannah's smirk. I wasn't designing buildings, I was designing an armor of success, bricked and mortared by their contempt. I was building a fortress they could never enter. Before noon, I sent the finished proposal. The first professional victory on the day of my personal devastation. What happens when the daughter they dismissed becomes the senior architect who wins the city's most prestigious contract? And what exactly did I cut out of my life besides my family? Real independence wasn't just about walking out, it was about cutting the emotional wires. I blocked their numbers, archived every photo, and tossed the sentimental clutter that tied me to the past. That was me, performing emotional surgery on myself. I used the money I would have spent on family gifts for business courses. I didn't just want to be an architect, I wanted to understand the financial machinery that moved the city. I transformed myself from a meticulous designer into a strategic powerhouse. My new mantra, if they saw me as a burden, I'll become the heavy weight that shifts the entire market. The fear of failure, once crippling, became a cold fuel. Every long night wasn't a sacrifice. It was a deposit into my future life. I even changed my appearance, sharper suits, a deliberate, powerful presence. I looked nothing like the meek daughter who sat at their table. What were the immediate and shocking consequences of my transformation? And how did my first major career win put me directly on a collision course with my sister, Hannah? The initial fire of anger faded, leaving a cold, hard space. I realized revenge wasn't about making them suffer, it was about defining my own moral universe. I didn't seek forgiveness from them, and I didn't need to forgive them. Forgiveness meant accepting their behavior. I couldn't grant absolution to people who showed zero remorse for treating me as subhuman. My ethics demanded better. I chose boundary over reconciliation. That choice was the cornerstone of my new life. Their pain no longer moved me. I was completely detached. I had spent so long fighting for their acceptance, but now I didn't care if they were happy or miserable. True freedom is emotional indifference to your abusers. It's the ultimate victory. All that wasted energy was now solely focused on creating value. Was my complete detachment the most painful form of retribution? And what amazing personal discovery did I make when I finally stopped looking for validation from my family? I executed the zero-contact rule immediately. My phone was purged. My address changed. They were entirely deleted from my life map. This wasn't petty, it was self-preservation. I needed clean air, and they were the perpetual smoke. My focus became monolithic: work. If I wasn't drafting, I was networking. If I wasn't networking, I was studying finance. I wanted my competence to be so undeniable, my absence from their lives would register not as a loss of a daughter, but as the loss of a major asset. Every slight, every moment of self-doubt they engineered, became energy for my success. It wasn't about revenge in the dramatic sense, it was about self-funding. I was monetizing my trauma, turning their contempt into market value. I built my foundation on the absolute conviction that they were wrong about me. The burden was now a senior architect, with a growing portfolio and total financial and emotional autonomy. My silence was the wall, my success was the visible, unshakable citadel. What happened when my sister, Hannah, tried to contact me years later, and how did a simple job interview bring my new life and my old family into a devastating, direct confrontation? The first tangible step was moving. I rented a small, sunny apartment far across the city. As I unpacked, every box felt lighter. There were no ghosts here, no forced memories. This was my sanctuary, built not on family ties, but on a signed lease and my own salary. I established new routines. No more anxiety on Sundays waiting for a passive-aggressive family call. Instead, I dedicated Sunday mornings to sketching new designs, filling the void with creativity. The energy drain stopped, and the professional results immediately followed. I changed my name slightly on professional profiles to ensure zero traceability. I wanted my success to be mine alone, untainted by their eventual attempt to claim it. I bought a triple lock for my door. The physical boundary was as important as the emotional one. My first month check, I paid rent, paid bills, and started a savings account. Every deposit was a promise. I will never, ever be dependent on them again. The burden was fully self-sufficient. What were the astonishing career milestones I hit in that first year of freedom? And how did my professional success ultimately become the unexpected foundation for my true, permanent happiness? Three months after I walked out, I secured the city tower contract. It was huge. The kind of project that defines careers. My name, Julia Chin, was on the front page of the business section, credited as the lead senior architect. My boss threw a champagne toast. My team cheered. This was the validation I had spent 30 years begging my family for, but it felt entirely different coming from people who valued my competence, not my blood relation. True success is earned, not inherited. I scanned the news articles for one small detail, my full name. I knew Dad reads that paper religiously. Did he see it? Did they call? Nothing. Their silence, once a weapon against me, was now a pathetic sign of their irrelevance to my progress. That contract meant a six-figure bonus. The burden had just secured more money in one quarter than my parents gave me in my entire lifetime. Did my parents finally break their silence when they saw my name in the paper? And how did my sister, Hannah, accidentally walk into a professional trap I had unintentionally set for her? I stopped being the quiet planner and became the face of innovation. I started accepting invitations to industry events. At one major conference, I even won an Emerging Leader Award. It wasn't just my firm noticing me, the entire city was noticing the architect they used to call a hobby. During the reception, I casually overheard executives discussing their new marketing VP position. The role was critical, but the company, Apex Innovations, was notorious for its toxic, cutthroat culture. I remember thinking, that sounds like a place Hannah would thrive. I didn't interfere. I didn't send an anonymous tip. I knew Hannah was aggressively looking for a step up. Her ambition, coupled with the family's relentless pressure for more, would drive her directly toward Apex. The system I rejected was now guiding her straight into a corporate grinder. My final, planned move was purchasing a piece of prime real estate, a lot directly overlooking my parents' house. I didn't build yet, but the property title spoke volumes. Did Hannah take the bait and join the toxic company? And how did my new property purchase become the visible symbol of my silent, devastating revenge? Once the noise of seeking validation stopped, I finally heard my own voice. I started doing things I loved, not things that would impress my parents. I traveled solo, learned to cook complex meals, and realized my true passion wasn't just architecture, but creating space, both physical and emotional. The friends I made now didn't care about my family history. They cared about the woman who could analyze a PL statement in a business meeting and laugh at a silly joke afterwards. I built a tribe of peers who uplifted me, not those who relied on my defeat to feel superior. Solitude, which once felt like loneliness, became my greatest comfort. I found immense peace in not being expected to perform or defend my existence. The silence in my new apartment wasn't empty, it was full of possibilities. I invested heavily in my mental and physical health. Therapy helped me unlearn the toxic programming. Exercise rebuilt my body and confidence. I realized that the burden label was their projection, not my reality. My goals shifted from earning their praise to earning my own happiness. It sounds cliché, but it was revolutionary. My definition of success broadened from career titles to include genuine human connection and self-respect. I was no longer a one-dimensional character fighting for acceptance. I was a thriving professional, a loyal friend, and a contented individual. The silence of my family had forced me to find the beauty in the quiet strength of self-sufficiency. When I thought about my family now, I felt less pain and more curiosity, the detached interest of a scientist observing an expired experiment. They were the past. I was the future. What was the astonishing, final act of my personal revenge, and how did I use my architectural expertise to send one last, undeniable message to the family who called me a burden? I met Lucas at a sustainability conference. He didn't know the burden, he only saw the senior architect with the sharp mind and quick wit. He saw my competence, not my broken history. With him, there was no competition, only genuine support. Our relationship was the antithesis of my family. I was allowed to be vulnerable without being judged as weak. I didn't have to earn my space, it was given freely. For the first time, I felt the security of true, unconditional belonging, a foundation built on mutual respect. We decided to start a family. This wasn't about seeking approval, it was about creating the loving, safe environment I never had. My purpose shifted from proving them wrong to proving to my future child what a healthy, supportive life looks like. My family's cruelty gave me the strength to build this. My best revenge wasn't a plot against them, it was the construction of my own perfect, happy life. Did I ever see my family again after all this success? And what happened when Hannah, in a moment of utter professional collapse, finally saw the true cost of their toxic success? I often looked out and saw my city tower gleaming. That building was more than concrete, it was physical proof of their error. They couldn't see my worth, so I built it into the skyline. That was the purest form of success, entirely independent of their narrative. I didn't hate Hannah anymore. I saw her frantic climb as a desperate attempt to gain the validation I used to chase. She was trapped in the same toxic structure, forced to perform endlessly. That realization wasn't victory, it was pity. True freedom meant not caring when they finally tried to reach out, years later, after my name became a brand. The calls, the emails, they were just static. I had achieved the emotional distance where their opinion held zero gravity. My life was a testament. Never allow the validation of others to become the prerequisite for your happiness. My new family and my self-respect were the only things I needed to protect. What was the incredible, full-circle moment when I was finally forced to speak to Hannah? And how did that one conversation confirm that my strategic silence was the most devastating revenge of all? The contact finally came, not from my parents, but from Hannah. She was in genuine trouble at Apex Innovations, the toxic firm I knew she'd join. She needed a huge favor, professional leverage I alone possessed. I agreed to meet, but only on my terms, a public, neutral space, 30 minutes maximum. I arrived early, wearing my sharpest suit, embodying the professional success they never acknowledged. This wasn't a family reunion, it was a business meeting. Hannah was frantic. Her visionary marketing had failed in Apex's cutthroat environment, and she was facing a massive corporate penalty. She cried, something I hadn't seen since childhood. She wasn't the golden child anymore. She was a victim of the very system that celebrated her. She finally apologized, not for the past cruelty, but for needing my help now. I simply looked at her, calmly. I wish you the best, Hannah. But you don't get to treat me like an asset when you need something and a burden when you don't. I paid for my coffee, stood up, and walked away. No drama, no shouting. Just a decisive, professional exit. That moment was the true closure. Not forgiveness, but the absolute confirmation of my emotional independence. What was the very last thing I did, years later, that finally gave me the peace of mind to know that the revenge was truly complete? Stay tuned for the final, incredible payoff. Years after my walkout, I built my home on that prime lot, the one directly overlooking their opulent mansion. It wasn't a tacky display of wealth, but a masterpiece of minimalist, modern architecture, a clear, sharp contrast to their gaudy traditionalism. Every morning, the first thing they saw wasn't their own manicured lawn, but my clean, undeniable success literally sitting above them. That was the final, elegant statement of my independence. The message was clear, you couldn't contain me. I stood on my terrace, holding my daughter, looking down at the house where I spent 30 years fighting for a shred of decency. Her innocent laughter erased decades of pain. This new life, full of genuine warmth, was the true antidote to their poison. I realized I owed them a strange sort of thanks. Their cruelty had provided the fuel, the absolute necessity for my flight. Without their rejection, I might have stayed, settling for mediocrity disguised as familial duty. The hate was gone. There was only quiet peace and boundless self-respect. They were still trapped in their gilded cage of expectations and performance. I was free, soaring high above their judgment. I had won the war, not with confrontation, but with construction. I looked at my daughter and made a final vow: she would never feel the burden of conditional love. She would be seen, heard, and cherished for exactly who she is. That promise was my architectural masterpiece. Did they ever look up and acknowledge the magnitude of my victory? And what life lesson did I pass on to my daughter, the one thing that truly guarantees a life of unshakable self-worth? Life wasn't a relentless chase anymore, it was a quiet morning ritual. Waking up in the house I designed, not a borrowed room. The smell of fresh coffee, not performance anxiety. This feeling of being utterly grounded in my own achievements was the truest luxury. Lucas and I built a partnership where failure was a lesson, not a moral flaw. He never asked about my family, never judged the silence. His acceptance was the gentle rain that nurtured the seeds of self-worth I had struggled to plant in the barren soil of my past. Raising my daughter became my ultimate project. I made sure her world was a safe space for curiosity and mistakes. I wasn't just not being my parents, I was actively teaching her that she was already enough. That was my revenge, breaking the cycle. Sometimes, from my balcony, I still saw the familiar cars pulling up to their house. I never felt malice. Just an anthropologist's curiosity. They were still performing for each other, still living the script. Their drama was now a distant, muted broadcast I had switched off forever. My financial security was ironclad. That money represented not just wealth, but freedom. The ultimate ability to say no. My savings weren't for retirement, they were a fortress built against external control. So, what does this life of quiet, successful independence teach us about the true meaning of winning? And what final, critical piece of advice would I give to anyone still struggling under the weight of a toxic family? Success isn't a straight line, it's a series of controlled crises. We hit a major snag on the City Tower project, a structural flaw discovered by the City Council. The pressure was immense. In the past, I would have crumbled under the weight of panic and self-doubt. But years of fighting a toxic family taught me true resilience. I didn't panic. I didn't blame. I calmly led the team, outlining the solution before the panic could set in. The skills they told me I lacked, leadership, decisiveness, were the very tools I used to save the project. In the heat of the meeting, I heard my mother's voice: "You're too emotional for this." But the voice was weak, a distant whisper drowned out by the authority in my own voice. I had spent so long trying to please her, now, I simply replaced her negative tape with professional fact. My zero-contact rule wasn't just physical separation, it was intellectual training. Every challenge I faced professionally was less terrifying than facing their dinner table judgment. The biggest obstacle I ever overcame was walking out that door. Everything else was just engineering. The greatest building material isn't steel or glass, it's self-worth. When your sense of value comes from within, external forces, a failing project, or a family's venom, can only bend you, never break you. I was the architect of my own spirit. Later that night, I wrote in my journal. I realized that my revenge wasn't about their downfall, it was about the peace I earned. I stopped measuring my life by their standards the moment I started measuring it by my own contentment. If I had to summarize the entire journey into one single, non-negotiable principle, what would it be? And what is the ultimate, final truth about family revenge stories? I was invited back to my university to give a guest lecture on my tower design. Standing on that stage, looking at the bright, hopeful faces of the students, I realized this was my platform, not theirs. This was the recognition that truly mattered. I spoke not just about engineering, but about building foundations, the kind that are internal. I told them, never let your self-worth be tied to anyone's approval, especially not those who claim to love you unconditionally. That moment felt more important than any contract signed. That night, I wrote a letter to the 18-year-old me, the girl desperate for a hug from Dad. I told her, "You are not a burden. Your sensitivity is a strength. Your quiet nature is a superpower. You don't need to be loud to matter." The process of writing wasn't about seeking retroactive apology from them, it was about giving myself the acceptance I deserved. Healing wasn't the absence of trauma, but the complete acceptance of the self that survived the trauma. I realized my victory wasn't the building, the money, or even the closure with Hannah. My victory was the ability to look in the mirror and genuinely love the woman staring back. I achieved self-worth. That's the greatest asset you can build. My life had a new mantra, simple and unbreakable: I am the ultimate authority on my own value. No board member, no parent, no sibling could ever take that away. That principle was my final, unshakable foundation. So, what does this life of quiet, successful independence teach us about the true meaning of winning? And what final, critical piece of advice would I give to anyone still struggling under the weight of a toxic family? The evening was perfect. Laughter, not forced smiles. Good food, not silent competition. We celebrated the 5th anniversary of my firm. The people around my table were the family I chose, the ones who saw me as an architect, a partner, and a friend. I raised a glass to the greatest victory, not the one that crushes an opponent, but the one that builds an unshakable self. Lucas squeezed my hand. We toasted to autonomy, the freedom to decide your own value, independent of background or expectations. I even thanked my past, silently. The toxicity I endured wasn't my destiny, it was my launch pad. It taught me the sheer necessity of independence. Without their rejection, I would never have tasted the clean, pure air of self-made success. From my window, the lights of their old mansion seemed dimmer than usual. I realized they weren't seeing my house as a threat, they were seeing it as a mirror. It reflected the life they tried to hold back, the potential they denied. I redefined revenge. It wasn't the malicious downfall of another, it was the joyful, spectacular rise of the self. The most powerful act of retribution is becoming a person so contented and successful that the past loses its power to hurt you. Holding my daughter, I felt an almost physical peace. I broke the generational pattern of conditional love and toxic expectations. That moment, ensuring my child's freedom, was the most satisfying and permanent form of closure I could ever achieve. I learned that the greatest family revenge story isn't about getting even. It's about getting well. It's about building a life so rich in genuine love and success that the memory of their cruelty becomes nothing more than a historical footnote. So, what final, critical piece of advice would I give to anyone still struggling under the weight of a toxic family? And what is the ultimate, final truth about family revenge stories? My life is measured in moments of genuine joy, not forced achievement. I wake up, and the first thought isn't what do I need to prove, but what can I create? The silence of freedom is a powerful, restorative energy. Lucas is my safe harbor. He doesn't smooth over my edges, he celebrates them. He sees the fire in my ambition and never mistakes it for desperation. Our partnership is built on recognizing each other's inherent value, a concept entirely alien to my birth family. Hearing my daughter's unrestrained laughter is the sound of success. It's the sound of a childhood free from the pressure to perform. I don't praise her grades, I praise her effort, her curiosity, her kindness. I am actively teaching her what I wish I had learned: self-acceptance is power. My family used fear as a building block. My chosen family uses trust. Trust in my competence, trust in my love, and trust in my right to be happy. This trust is the ultimate, unshakable foundation. The zero contact rule is not a punishment, it's a boundary that protects this peace. I realized that setting boundaries isn't cruel, it's necessary for self-respect. Protecting my mental space from their toxicity is the greatest act of love I could give to my chosen family. My wealth means freedom. It means Lucas and I can build a life based on our values, not economic necessity. The money I earned wasn't just to buy a house. It bought the fundamental right to exist without permission. I sometimes see old traits resurface, a hint of performance anxiety, a need to overdeliver. But now, I recognize them, address them gently, and choose a new response. The past doesn't define me, it simply gives me data on how not to live. The need for revenge dissipated completely. Why waste energy fighting ghosts? My perfect, contented life, built entirely on my terms, is the final, undeniable period at the end of their story. What is the final, critical piece of advice I would give to anyone still struggling under the weight of a toxic family? And how can you apply my architectural mantra, build your own foundation, to your own life? My office is my final fortress. Here, I'm not fighting to be heard, I'm listening to my own thoughts. The silence, once a terrifying echo of their disapproval, is now the sound of deep concentration and self-respect. Solitude is where self-worth solidifies. My motivation shifted entirely from extrinsic to intrinsic. I used to work for their nod, now, I work for the joy of solving a complex problem. The reward isn't the applause, it's the quiet satisfaction of a job done excellently, based purely on my own standards. I finally embraced my own imperfections. My family demanded flawless performance. Now, I allow myself to make mistakes, viewing them as design revisions, not moral failures. This authenticity is the true measure of my emotional health. My life is an architectural project. The foundation was the moment I walked out, the radical rejection of their unstable ground. Every subsequent success was simply adding floors to a structure built on rock-solid self-trust. You can't build a stable life on unstable ground. I often think of the word burden they used. It ceased to be an insult. It became a descriptor of their limited worldview. They couldn't carry my potential, so they labeled it a burden. The word now reminds me of the power I possess. I learned that my true skill wasn't designing buildings, but designing my life. I engineered boundaries, reinforced my self-esteem, and chose collaborators, Lucas, my friends, who amplified my strengths, not exploited my weaknesses. My final emotion toward them is not hate, but a profound sadness for their captivity. They are still performing for each other, driven by fear of inadequacy. They won the battle of appearances, but lost the war for their own souls. The final piece of wisdom is deceptively simple: you are enough. You are enough to leave, enough to succeed, enough to be loved, and enough to be happy. This realization is the non-negotiable principle I wish I could give to every victim of conditional love. I close my journal, look out at the beautiful, quiet life I built, and feel not triumph, but peace. The revenge was simply being happy. The story is over, and the only character left is the contented one. What is the final, non-negotiable principle I want you to take away from my story? And how can you apply my architectural mantra, build your own foundation, to start your own journey of self-made peace today? I occasionally stumble upon old family photos. My face in those pictures is a stranger's, tense, always trying to smile harder. I view them now with a distant, almost anthropological curiosity, like studying a civilization I once belonged to but now observe from afar. I started seeing my parents not as villains, but as deeply unhappy people trapped by their own generational expectations. They were victims of the system they perpetuated, valuing what they owned over who they were. That was their true, perpetual punishment. Hannah, the golden child, is still climbing the corporate ladder at an even higher stress firm than Apex. She is rich, but constantly brittle, terrified of the slightest professional slip. She achieved the title they wanted, but lost the peace I found. I know they sometimes talk about me, the prodigal daughter who succeeded despite them. But their story about me isn't real. It's just a way for them to manage the cognitive dissonance of realizing that their rejection was their greatest mistake. I didn't delete the old photos, I archived them. That's the perfect metaphor. The past is filed away, inaccessible for daily use, but available as a history lesson. It no longer takes up space in my present memory cache. I never sought reconciliation. True healing doesn't require the abuser's apology. My peace required their absence. Responsibility for past actions is theirs. My responsibility is to protect my future from those actions. I pick up the photo of Lucas and my daughter. Their smiles are genuine, the result of unscripted joy. This is the only family portrait that matters now. It confirms that the greatest act of creation is the creation of a loving, healthy environment. Success is getting to redefine your terms. It's not the external measure of wealth they worshipped, but the internal measure of peace I possess. My success is quiet. Their struggle is loud. And that difference is everything. I offer my story not as a blueprint for revenge, but as a map to freedom. Every challenge they presented became a lesson in boundary setting and self-trust. Use their rejection not as a wound, but as a source of fuel. What is the final, non-negotiable principle I want you to take away from my story? And how can you apply my architectural mantra, build your own foundation, to start your own journey of self-made peace today? Look, my story isn't unique. If you're out there, fighting for validation from people who will never give it, this next part is for you. Stop waiting for the apology. That's their work, not yours. Your work is radical self-liberation. I'm an architect. My core lesson is this: you cannot build a strong life on a faulty foundation. The moment you realize your family's ground is toxic, you must walk away and pour your own concrete. Build your own foundation. That is the single most important structure you will ever create. They taught me success was status, titles, and material accumulation. I learned its inner peace. True success is the ability to close your eyes at night and feel whole. Regardless of what anyone else thinks, especially the people who raised you. Setting boundaries is not rejection, it's self-preservation. My zero-contact rule was the ultimate no. Learn to say no to toxicity, to performance demands, and to the burden of pleasing others. No is the most powerful word in the vocabulary of a survivor. You deserve love that requires no preconditions. If someone's love for you is conditional, based on your job, your grades, or your obedience, it's not love. It's control. Recognize that, grieve it, and then walk towards people who love the real, unpolished you. Let's talk about revenge. My revenge was not their failure, it was my healing. The ultimate act of retribution against a toxic system is to build a life so genuinely peaceful and happy that their cruelty becomes irrelevant. Peace is the trophy of the self-made survivor. The moment I stopped chasing their approval, I had space to find my chosen family. Lucas, my friends, my team, they are my true anchors. They don't fill a void, they reinforce the strength I already possess. Your tribe is out there, waiting for you to value yourself first. I'll leave you with the non-negotiable principle: you are enough. Right now, just as you are. Your worth is inherent, it is not earned through performance or suffering. Own that truth, and you own your entire future. Your architectural project begins today. What foundational steps will you take? How will you start building your own peace? We planted a new tree in the garden, a symbol of the future we're building. It was a conscious act, nurturing something with intention and gentle, unconditional support. The contrast to my own upbringing, which tried to prune me into someone else's shape, was stark. My greatest purpose now is ensuring this child grows up knowing her inherent worth is immutable. She is not a tool for my validation, she is the continuation of my freedom. This legacy of love, free from the chains of performance, is my most treasured achievement. Growth doesn't stop just because the revenge plot is over. I actively practice self-compassion. When the old negative voices creep in, I challenge them with data, the success of my firm, the laughter of my family. I am my own reliable data point. I have achieved a profound freedom, the freedom from comparison. I don't look at other people's success, even Hannah's, as a threat or a measure. The only standard is the quiet, internal assessment: am I living authentically, kindly, and with purpose? The answer is a resounding yes. True peace required acknowledging the grief for the family I should have had. It's okay to mourn that loss. But I didn't let that void define me. I used that sadness as the rich, dark soil in which I planted my current, vibrant life. My architectural blueprints are now designs for a meaningful life. I focus on structural integrity, not just of buildings, but of relationships. I choose collaborators who are secure enough to celebrate my strengths and challenge me with respect. The silence from my birth family is not a void, it's a confirmation. Their non-presence is the continuous guarantee of my peace. They were the background noise, and I finally discovered the joy of turning the volume all the way down. Your story doesn't end with their last word. It begins with your first brave step. Don't seek revenge, seek your freedom. Don't seek their love, seek your own. That's the only victory that truly lasts. I look out over my city, the city tower gleaming. I built that. But the best thing I built was this life, this family, this peace. I'm Julia Chin, and this is how you build your own sky. Your architectural project begins today. What foundational steps will you take? How will you start building your own peace? Before we sign off, I need to talk directly to anyone who sees their own pain in my story. My goal was never just to get out, it was to create a blueprint for freedom. Stop seeing yourself as a victim, start seeing yourself as the architect of your next chapter. Here's lesson 1. Your self-worth is non-negotiable and inherent. It is not earned through their approval, your job title, or your bank account. You are enough, simply because you exist. Don't let conditional love convince you otherwise. Lesson 2. Boundaries are acts of self-love, not cruelty. The word no is the strongest structural reinforcement you possess. And lesson 3. Healing is internal, reconciliation is optional. You don't need their participation to mend your own soul. Lesson 4. The ultimate revenge is peace. Stop fighting their war. The energy you spend on trying to prove them wrong is energy stolen from building your true life. When you find genuine contentment, their opinion shrinks to an irrelevant whisper. Finally, lesson 5. Choose your family. Build your tribe based on respect, trust, and acceptance. They are your new, rock-solid foundation. Now, I challenge you, what is the very first step you will take today to pour your own concrete?